Dear learners, I welcome you to this lecture on contemporary discourse on human rights. In the contemporary discourse on human rights, we discussed first of all terrorism and counter-terrorism and how it violates human rights. Then we discussed environmental rights. It is one of the major issues that is being discussed in human rights fraternity these days, and it has also become a common global concern for all of us. Then we also discussed rights of sexual minorities, that is, we also called LGBTQ++, and then arms, race, and human rights we have been dealing. In the arms race and human rights, we have been talking about the impact of arms transfer on human rights. Then latest data and trends we will be discussing. Then how, why people say that human nature is responsible for armament. Then we'll go to discuss state as the supreme human institution, sovereignty and non-interference, how this particular principle of sovereignty and non-interference is also becoming one of the factors responsible for what we call arms race and armament. Then we will discuss a state and monopoly over means of destruction. It includes, of course, weapons, all kind of weapons. So the means of destruction, that a state has a monopoly. Private individuals or the private organizations, they are not allowed to have. Means the legitimacy of use of force or violence is always with the state. Then we'll discuss data-driven concerns. A state as the organizer of violence, a critical lens. Then a struggle for power among states, mutual suspicion and sense of insecurity, arms weapons possessed by states, what is the strength of the arms and weapons of the various states, Amnesty International and campaign of arms control. Then we will try to conclude. We discussed, the how it is responsible for, this arms race. So first of all, the consequences of uncontrolled arms transfer on human rights are extensive and far-reaching. While the precise figures are difficult to track due to the opaque nature of arms trade, available data paints a bleak picture. Direct impact: civilian casualties. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, in 2021 alone, over 85,000 civilians were killed in armed conflicts worldwide. Arms transfers directly contribute to these deaths and injuries, as readily available weapons empower armed actors to engage in violence with devastating consequences for civilian population. So that you can, how arms transfer or the weaponization of the states or even the non-state actors, that is leading to a lot of civilian casualties. Internal displacement, another important impact, that how it threatens human rights of the people. Then you can find the small arms survey estimates that over 40 million people are currently internally displaced due to armed conflict, many of whom have fled their homes due to the violence fueled by the unchecked flow of weapons. So you see, if the civil war like situation, or if in a particular area genocidal violence is going on or ethnic cleansing is going on, you will find the small arms that are supplied to the various groups, they are responsible for this, because you see that they may be ideologically motivated or indoctrinated, but at the same time, what is happening, that the arms and the weapons, that the constant supply of the arms and weapons, if that is there, that may lead to this number of displacement and all. Refugees, you will find that the UNHCR, that is the main body that deals with the refugees, report that over 100 million people are forcibly displaced worldwide, escaping war, violence, and persecution. Of course, here you can understand the importance, the significance of arms, or the role of arms in all these conflicts. While not exclusively caused by arms transfer, the availability of weapons certainly exacerbates these situations and fuels the displacement crisis. Human rights abuses. The use of weapons often creates a climate of fear and impunity, enabling human rights abuses such as torture, arbitrary detention, and extrajudicial killings. Amnesty International reports that over 70 countries have committed serious human rights violations in the past year, many of which were perpetrated using weapons obtained through international transfers. You'll find it's a lucrative trade. You'll find that even at the time of slowdown, the major economies of the world, their military industrial complex were in a very, very robust and a strong position. So the military industrial complex that we see in the different countries of the world, they are flourishing even if there is slowdown or meltdown or whatever you call it. Indirect impact. It is also adding to gender-based violence. For example, the small arms are used in this kind of gender-based violence as well. The presence of readily available weapons significantly increase the risk of gender-based violence that you will find. While proper quantification of the phenomenon is hard for obvious reasons, it is estimated, for example, that at least 5 lakh women were raped during the Rwandan genocide and 50,000 during the war in Bosnia. You see that again you will find these were the armed conflict where there was a flow of arms and weapons by their supporters, and that led to this gender-based violence, including gang rapes. You will find mass rape of the women and the genocide. That the example is from Rwanda and the example is also from Bosnia. Development hindrance. Resources allocated towards purchasing and maintaining weapons often come at the expense of vital social programs such as the healthcare and education. This is also debatable these days. Human rights organizations, they have been pointing out that there is a lot of deviation or diversion of resources in a very negative direction, that is destructive purposes, that is acquisition of arms and weapons. And that's why you'll find that most of the states are these days are going to cut their healthcare benefits, or in the social sector they are not investing much, rather they are withdrawing from the social sector. But at the same time you will find there is already increase in the defense budget. So this kind of security, the militarized security concern, that is responsible for diversion of resources for a destructive purpose. But you will find that all the states of the world, they feel that this investment in the national security, especially for maintaining military, buying weapons, producing weapons, that is must for the national security. So because of that, social sector is ignored. Healthcare facilities are not good. You will find the states are not investing much in education. There is a lot of cutbacks you will find in the social sector. This diverts resources from crucial development efforts, perpetuating poverty and inequality, which in turn can fuel further instability and violence. There is no doubt in it that if you see the state is not able to fulfill the needs of the people, and if the youth anger is developed, if the segments of the population feel that the state is not responsive to their problem, then what will happen that it may develop social tension, unrest, and that may fuel the instability and violence. Environmental damage. The use and production of weapons can have significant negative impacts on the environment. This includes the depletion of natural resources, land degradation, and the release of toxic chemicals. And the various studies have been conducted. For example, the people, those who are working in the, if there is a nuclear weapons production that is there and the people are working over there, they are prone to radiation and what kind of health hazards are there. Most of the time, you will find that the states are trying to hide what are the hazards, and the human rights organizations are trying to know. And many studies have been conducted on the people, those who are working in the nuclear weapons factories, or where you will find that where these nuclear bombs or nuclear weapons are kept, or wherever this kind of research is going on, how it is going to impact the health of the people, that and how it is damaging the environment. For example, if there is a nuclear test or nuclear explosion, what is the impact of that nuclear explosion or nuclear test, that is to be understood, and how it is responsible for many environmental hazards. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, that is the SIPRI, estimates that the global military sector is responsible for around 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. You see this This is important to understand. The global military sector alone, you see, this is responsible for around 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, contributing to climate change and its associated threats. According to CIPRI, again, global arms transfer increased by 1.4% in the period 2018 and 2022 compared to the previous 5 years. So, there is constant increase. And if you compare this, the increase in the arms transfer or the allocation of budget for defense, and you compare with the social sector, for example, education and health, you will find there is decline in most of the states. This highlights the ongoing proliferation of weapons despite the potential consequences. The Middle East remains the largest recipient region for major conventional weapons, accounting for 42% of global arms imports between 2018 and 22 that you can find, and that's why you will find that the Middle East is the most volatile region. Conflicts, nationalism, ethnic nationalism, you will find the other kind of conflict, sectarianism, all these things are there. And why you will find that you can find a connection between the arms transfer and also the conflict that is going on in the Middle East. This region continues to face numerous armed conflicts, highlighting the complex dynamics between arms transfers and regional instability. The United States remains the world's largest arms exporter, accounting for 40% of global arms export between 2018 and 22. So you'll find that it is one of the most flourishing sectors so far as the industries of America is concerned. So that is why it is a major supplier. You already find that 40% of the global arms exports that America is responsible for this. This dominant role in the global arms trade raises questions about the responsibility of major powers in mitigating the negative consequences of arms transfers. So, in many cases, you will find there are countries who are known for violating the rights of their own people or rights of others. You will find when the countries are going to sell their weapons, they never take into account what is the track record of these countries, and that's why it is a trade where you will find that the profit is the motive, and human rights is always taking the back seat. So the countries who are accused of, or the countries who are known for violating human rights, these countries are also the recipient of arms and weapons from the major powers of the world. Russia remains the second largest arms exporter in the world, accounting for 16% global arms export between the same year. As per the reports of CIPRI 2022, the five largest exporter of arms during that period, the USA, Russia, France, China, and Germany, accounted for over three quarters, 76% of all arms exports. And you will find that these are the countries who also talk of human rights most of the time at the international fora. So, this dichotomy, this paradox that is there, on the one hand, they are supplying or selling arms and weapons to the countries who are known for conflict and violating human rights. On the other hand, these countries themselves are talking about human rights, peace, and democracy, etc. Not all, of course, Russia and China, they have a different kind of record. Now, the debate, again, we are coming back to the debate human nature and the armament. The relationship between human nature and armament is a complex and contested issue with no easy answers. While the debate often enters on inherent tendencies and the inevitability of weapons, it is important to consider the multifaceted nature of human behavior and the influence of various factors beyond innate predispositions. Argument for an inherent human propensity for arms or armament. Evolutionary perspective. Some argue that natural selection has uh, favored individuals and groups adept at self defense and competition. In this view, the development of weapons is seen as a natural extension of this evolutionary imperative, serving as tools for survival and dominance. Psychological theories. Certain psychological theories posit inherent human drives like aggression, power, and territoriality as potential catalysts for the development and utilization of weaponry. These drives, when combined with societal structures or environmental pressures, can influence the creation and use of arms. Challenge to the inherent propensity argument. Cultural and environmental influences. Proponents of this view often overlook the significant role of culture and environment in shaping human behavior towards violence and weapon use. Cultural norms, social values, and access to resources can significantly influence the way individuals and societies interact with violence and weapons. So you'll find that the cultural and environment. It is said that right from the childhood, the children are basically, we try to inculcate violence in their behavior. For example, if a child is hit by a table, we try to show the child that okay, how the child will get satisfaction. We are trying to teach him revenge. So we'll try to hit the table and we'll say that look, we have already punished the table, and then the child gets satisfaction. He sometime you will find that he is smiling. So what is this? It means we are inculcating violence among the children when they are not knowing what is the difference between violence and non-violence. So most of the time you'll find the societal condition, cultural norms, environment under which they are living, the human beings are living, they all play a very, very important role. For example, societies with a strong emphasis on pacifism and non-violent conflict resolution may exhibit lower levels of weapon use compared to societies where violence is normalized or seen as a necessary tool for resolving disputes. So, different kind of approaches. You'll find sometimes there is glorification of violence. It may be in the name of national security. It may be in the name of patriotism. It may be in the name of nationalism. It may be in the name of peace. It may be in the name of revenge. All, but you will find that sometime in many many cultures, tradition, you will find that there is a lot of glorification for violence. Historical and social factors. The development and use of weapons throughout history have been heavily influenced by technological advancement, political ideologies, and social structures. That cannot be denied, of course. The invention of gunpowder and the rise of nation states, for instance, fundamentally transformed warfare and the role of weaponry in society. This highlights the impact of external factors beyond innate human tendencies. Now, what are the these are the tendencies, these are the theories or the approaches that support this view that human arms and weapons, they are necessary alternative narratives. Critics of the inherent propensity argument suggest that human cooperation and social cohesion are equally, if not more important aspect of human nature. So that may transcend all kind of boundaries, ideological, political, religious, all kind of boundaries it can transcend. So that's why this is one thing that what is called sarv dharm sambhava, all we all belong to one human family, that kind of feeling. They point to historical and contemporary examples of societies that have prioritized non-violent conflict resolution and peaceful coexistence. This highlights the potential for alternative narratives that prioritize peace and collaboration over armament and conflict. We can find this kind of best example from our own Indian history. Ashoka the Great, for example, after the Battle of Kalinga, he renounced war forever, and he became the apostle of peace, messenger of peace and non-violence. Now we are coming to the argument that the state as the supreme human institution, sovereignty and non-interference. The concept of the state as the supreme human institution is a long held principle in international relations, often cited by governments to justify their actions. We will find it is said that among all the institutions that human beings have developed so far, a state is the supreme human institution because it is the state only that possesses sovereignty. And sovereignty means an institution, a state as an institution is internally supreme and externally free. So the sovereignty is the monopoly of a state. And when the states are there, there is an understanding at the international level among all the states, or what we call the Committee of Nations, that there should be the principle of mutual non interference. That is an agreed upon norm at the international level, in the international arena. So in this case, what happens? For example, if a state, because of its extremism, maybe a particular ideology which is extremist, fundamentalist, racist, or whatever it is, even if it is committing genocide, even if it is becoming a perpetrator of the violation of human rights, it becomes very difficult for the supranational bodies or other states to intervene. And that's why for a long period of time you'll find in many states there have been genocides, colossal violation of human rights. But for the international community was just helpless, could not do anything. So that is why, because this principle of sovereignty and non-interference that is there, it posits that a state hold inherent rights, including the right to self-defense and territorial integrity. It is not only that internally they have this right, but at the same time they have a right to self-defense, and also they have to maintain their territorial integrity or national security, what we call today. So in this case, for example, the state will try to acquire arms and weapons, and if the arms and weapons are there, they will also try to use it if the challenges are such where they are to be used. So that's why you'll find in many states, and that's why it was found that states are major violator. I discussed with you that the Bisoni, when he conducted the study, he found that it is a state terrorism or a state violence that is responsible for killing 70 million people in 100 years. That is from 1901 to 2000. Whereas non-state terrorism is responsible, or non-state violence is responsible for 1 lakh casualties during the same period of time. So it means in this way you see that becomes quite problematic. This principle is closely linked to sovereignty, which grants states the authority to govern themselves without external interference. However, this principle of non-interference has become a point of contention when it comes to the issue of armament policies. Critics argue that the state's claim to absolute sovereignty can be misused to shield human rights abuses committed by its own security forces. So you'll find most of the time states are never agreeing. The most visible manifestation of the state power is, of course, police or the security forces. So when the states are violating the rights of their own people, or if its security forces are committing atrocities against the people, other people, they will never accept it, and rather they will think that this is their absolute sovereign right, and in the name of self-defense, in the name of national security, in the name of external threat, they do this, and that's why they try to misuse the sovereign power to shield human rights abuses. Here are some examples of this tension. For example, the Syrian civil war. During the Syrian civil war 2001, 2011 and present, the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad allegedly used brutal force against its own citizens, including chemical weapons attacks. It was alleged that Bashar al-Assad did this. Again, it is in the public domain that since the war is going on, so that is why people contest. There are many people who contest, or the journalists or the scholars who say it is quite contested whether he used chemical weapons or not. But ultimately, this kind of allegations you will find. But it cannot be denied that excessive use of force is there by the Bashar al-Assad army, and that's why that led to displacement of millions of people in Syria. It has been estimated that the war has killed more than 350,000 people and caused the displacement of half the Syrian population. As of December 2022, 6.8 million internally displaced people living in Syria. That is already, it has been estimated. You can understand the destruction that it can wrought about. As per the reports of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, over the past 10 years, an average of 84 civilians have been killed every day in direct connection to the war in Syria. You see, it is a war, but you see the use of weapons. Civilians, 84 civilians every day, that is, the average. Despite international condemnation and calls for intervention, the principle of non-interference limited the international community's ability to take concrete action to stop the atrocities. and you'll find that the power politics is also there. So that's why whenever any resolution was there in the UN Security Council, then China and Russia came together and they vetoed the resolution. So that is why you see, and what is their argument? China and Russia, they have been arguing that it is the internal matter of the Syrian government or Syrian state, and that's why there should not be outside interference. So this principle of non-interference, that is also an agreed upon norm in the international arena, also become a stumbling block in the way of realization or in the way of protecting human rights of the people living in sovereign territorial states. This raises the question of whether the principle of sovereignty should supersede the responsibility to protect civilians from widespread human rights violations. Again, you'll find the Myanmar coup in 2021. The Burmese military staged a coup d'etat, overthrowing the democratically elected government. This resulted in crackdowns on peaceful protest and widespread human rights abuses. While the international community condemned the coup and imposed limited sanctions, the principle of non interference again played a role in limiting the scope of international intervention. And you'll find before that the Myanmar Janta or Myanmar military government was accused of committing genocide against the Rohingya Muslims living in Myanmar. So still, the international community could not do anything, and you'll find thousands of these Rohingya Muslims. They are already displaced from their own country and living in other countries in very bad conditions. The Saudi Arabia-led intervention in Yemen, again, here you'll find what kind of arms and weapons and the indiscriminate use of bombing and all that has been taken place in Yemen, and that is also leading to, humanitarian crisis and widespread civilian casualties. You'll find the UN has estimated that the war in Yemen had killed 3,77,000 people by the end of 2021 through direct and indirect causes. Over 1,50,000 of these deaths were the direct result of the armed conflict, while far more have died due to hunger and disease as a result of the humanitarian crisis caused by the war. Nearly 15,000 civilians have been killed by direct military action, most of them in airstrikes by the Saudi led coalition. You see, civilian casualty 15,000. Again, critics argue that the arms sales by Western countries to Saudi Arabia, despite its poor human rights record, contribute to the conflict and its devastating consequences. This highlights the complex interplay between arms control, state sovereignty, and the responsibility to protect human rights. The Israel Palestine conflict, the long standing conflict between Israel and Palestine has also been marked by concerns about human rights abuses and the principle of national sovereignty. The conflict, which was started on October 7, 2023, has resulted in displacing 1.5 million Palestinians and killing more than 40,000 civilians, including children, women, and old age people. You see, so that is already there. And what is happening that whenever any resolution is brought in the United Nations, it is vetoed, and it is again said that Israel has every right of self-defense and all. A state and monopoly over means of destruction. We find that a state are claiming that they have monopoly over the means of destruction and also what is called the legitimate use of force. We will take up this point in our next class or in our next lecture, but you can understand what is the impact of arms trade or armament or arms race on the status of human rights in the different countries of the world, how they are threatening the rights of the people, the most basic right, that is right to life. You will find, and the displacement, you see, when the displacement of a population is there, they are prone to all kind of human rights abuses. It is leading to human trafficking, it is leading to prostitution, it is leading to what not. So therefore, these issues are very very important, but at the same time you will find that the sovereignty of the state is something that is recognized in the international law, and that dichotomy where when a state is state is violating human rights, and the supranational bodies and then other human rights organizations, they can just criticize or they can condemn, but they cannot do anything. So we are going to continue this lecture on the arms race and human rights violation. Thank you very much.